I've lived in a lot of places over the years, so I'm used to those tiny moments that remind you how small the world really is. Spotting a guy from the gym 2 continents away, or seeing a childhood crush in line at the DMV. They used to be small, funny coincidences. Lately, though, one of those coincidences went deep dark, and it changed everything. A while back, I moved into a modest townhouse up near a factory where I worked as a shift manager. The job wasn't glamorous. We made parts for outdoor equipment, snowmobiles, tractors, but it paid, and it was honest work. The commute was long, nearly an hour each way, but my place wasn't bad. 2 floors, 2 bedrooms, a cozy living space with a tiny kitchenette, roomy enough to feel comfortable. The only flaw was the bedroom door that jammed if you slammed it. I'd recently come out of a breakup. My ex and I had talked about moving in together and never quite made it past the fear. She had her anxieties, and in the end, she pulled away. So I accepted a transfer and the promotion and moved north to start over. One afternoon, as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed furniture heaped on the lawn across the street. A woman stood by the curb, juggling 2 movers and a couch that simply refused to go through the door. She waved me over like she was pleading with the world. I don't know why I offered. Being a good neighbor had always come easy, but I jogged across the street and helped angle the couch, tipping and twisting it until it cleared the threshold. She introduced herself as Julie, small, short hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, rings under her eyes, hands shaking like she hadn't slept in days. She tried to insist on paying me $20 for the trouble, but I refused. Her voice carried an odd, familiar cadence that tugged something in my head. Then I realized why. I'd gone to school with her. Julie had been my high school crush, once tall in a crowd. Then somehow she stopped growing, and the world passed her by. She laughed when I mentioned the old apple-shaped earrings she used to wear, a goofy memory now, and that little thing cracked the ice between us. She had a daughter. She said, Danny, 4 years old, and that's why she was moving. She glanced inside and said the kid had had a rough day and was resting. Before I left, I asked, on impulse, if she still had those apple earrings. She shook her head and smiled sadly. Times change. I walked home watching her through the window as she began to set up her new place. She hung pictures, put out a lamp, and settled a strange blue sunflower in a pot on the sill. It was tall and oddly bright. It caught my eye and later my unease. A few days passed and I kept my distance. I didn't want to look like the weird neighbor who shows up at the wrong time. But the mailbox mix-ups kept happening. I'd open my door to find letters for Julie and vice versa. One morning there was a misplaced bill addressed to her, and I decided to stop by and hand it over. She answered the door with phone tucked to her cheek and a tired smile. I told her I'd dropped the bill off and offered to help. With some odds and ends, she admitted she was terrible with electronics and asked if I could come by the next evening to run a cable and set up a simple camera system for the little one's room. Tomorrow at 7, she said. I'll bring coffee. I agreed. That evening, the sunflower was still in the window, and the pot seemed to point at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. Inside, Julie had already done a lot of work, framed photos, a neat kitchen, a hall with big yellow letters leading to the girl's room, Little Lady Sunflower. It was saccharine, and I could tell she'd worked to make a life here again. She said Danny was with her aunt that night, so we could mount the camera without disturbing her. Setting up the Wi-Fi and the cameras was straightforward, and she made me coffee afterward. We talked about old friends, about the school, and about James. the husband who appeared in almost every photo on the wall. He had the same light hair that contrasted with Julie's dark mahogany. I asked gently where he was now. Her face went hard and she said, "There used to be plenty of pictures of Danny. We kept only these." It was the first time I felt a real edge in the conversation. She told me about a fire and about losses she'd had to bear, but she brushed over the details. For a while, I visited now and then. We swapped leftovers. I brought wine as a housewarming gift, and she fed me sausage stroganoff that warmed the place and made it feel less like a transient home. Even after weeks of friendly exchanges, I'd never actually seen Danny. She was always described as being with a friend or an aunt, and photos of her were curiously absent. When I asked to see a picture on Julie's phone, she would divert, laugh it off, and change the subject. I was curious, but not enough to pry. One night after a long shift, I came home and noticed a note stuck to my door. "Drop this off. Didn't hear you." It was just another mail mix, but something about it made me think back to the camera feed I'd helped her set up. There was a chance, however small and wrong it felt, that the footage might show where the mailman had actually gone. I logged into the camera feed with the password she'd given me and rewound the footage. What I saw made my stomach drop. The clip showed Julie entering my house that morning while I left for work. She opened my front door, lingered in my living room for over an hour, then walked back across the street carrying the same blue sunflower pot. Later, she stood by the corner of the child's room, tending to something behind the curtains under the UV light. The sunflower turned, not toward the sun, but toward the camera lens itself, as if it were alive. I felt guilty watching it, and yet I couldn't stop. A knot in my chest tightened. The next time I went over, Julie's smile was tired, but warmer. She offered me grilled cheese and a quiet chat. For a while things were ordinary, too ordinary. She moved around the kitchen like someone rehearsed in grief and habit. Then, between sips of coffee, she whispered things that made my head tilt. She talked about being missed, about needing someone, and there was this strange sweetness that laced the words. Later, when she kissed me, it tasted odd, like chemicals, a metallic note under the top layer, but I pushed it aside as nerves and desire. The day after we crossed some invisible line, the world seemed to tilt. Sounds I'd never noticed became intrusive. My ear felt blocked with something soft and gritty. I picked at it with a toothpick and dirt came out onto the table. The break room at work turned into a hallucination of sprouts writhing across the table, and my hands cramped so badly I nearly ripped my own fingers with the turkey sandwich I was holding. Co-workers hauled me to urgent care. The doctors were puzzled but chalked it up to stress and exhaustion. At home, the notes and scraps on my table multiplied. Small flashes of the kitchen scene would erupt in my head, Julie humming a strange tune, hands covered in soil, and that blue sunflower nodding toward me. I told myself I was tired, that old crush, the loneliness, and the aftershock of everything had warped my perception. But then the night started to contain impossible things. One evening I awoke with the smell of smoke and a searing, bursting pain in my ears. I staggered downstairs and the house had shifted. A second chair at the table, a plate of pancakes I didn't remember making, and the voice 3 inches from me saying, "It's your favorite, Daddy." I spun. The chair was empty. My reflection looked wrong. The world felt like cellophane wrapped over my senses. I tried to breathe normally and felt the pressure again, like deep-sea diving with ears that wouldn't clear. Soon after, The scratches of movement at my bedroom door became more frantic. Something thumped, something tiny and desperate was pulling itself along the floorboards toward me. My bedroom window jammed, the old door that always stuck now locked solid. When I slammed it, it stuck hard. I heard a pained voice outside that sounded like Julie, but deeper and cracked. She muttered, "She'll bring you back," and then the strangest, most awful thing. The blue pot began to tremble at the foot of the stairs. As if something inside it had learned to push, I did the only thing left in me that felt like survival. I smashed my bedroom window and dove out onto the lawn. Glass shredded my skin. Blood ran down my legs. From the corner of my eye I saw something. A small, grubby arm, pale as sprout roots, dragging itself from the pot. The dog across the street started barking. Julie stood on the sidewalk, holding the pot like an offering, humming the same nursery melody. She watched me as if I were a thing being returned. I survived, but the cost was real. I was stitched up in hospital and spent days replaying memory fragments that kept morphing into images I couldn't trust. I moved away not long after. The house had become a place I couldn't stand to be. I thought the nightmares would fade, but sometimes in a quiet restaurant or at the checkout line, flashes would return, the sunflower turning its face toward me. That thick-sounding hum of the song she always seemed to be singing. Weeks later, a small unsigned card appeared on my doormat. In bright, celebratory print it read, "Congratulations. You're going to be a dad." No signature. No return address. My stomach dropped. I had no idea whether it was a prank or some leftover cruelty. But as I looked at the card, I heard again, faint and close, that voice. "She'll bring you back." The color from my face drained. I folded the card into my pocket and went to bed, knowing the world had changed in a way I couldn't fix. If you felt that chill crawl up your spine, you're not alone. This is one of those stories that starts with a simple act of neighborly kindness and turns into something you can't quite explain. If you want more true-feeling tales that walk the line between the ordinary and the terrifying, subscribe to Untold Scary Truths. Hit the bell, because you never know what's living next door. I'll see you in the next one. If you make it through the night,